20 days. 11 failed votes. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers without paychecks. The longest government shutdown in years is spiraling out of control, and Republicans are facing a political nightmare they didn't see coming. This is the crisis that's paralyzing Washington, and it's about to get worse. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're breaking down the biggest political stories without the spin. Today, we need to talk about what's happening in Washington right now, because it's not just political drama, it's affecting real people's lives. The U.S. government has been shut down for 3 weeks. The Senate has failed to pass a funding bill 11 times, and there's no end in sight. So let's break down how we got here, why this shutdown is different, who's really to blame, and what it means for millions of Americans. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's start with where we are right now. On Monday, October 23, the Senate failed for the 11th time to advance a Republican-backed bill to fund the government and end the shutdown. The vote wasn't even close to the 60 votes needed to pass. This shutdown officially began on October 1, 2025, when Congress failed to pass a funding measure before the deadline. That means we're now on day 20 of federal workers going without pay, government services being disrupted, and Washington locked in a stalemate that neither side seems willing to break. Here's what makes this particularly brutal. The Senate has been voting almost daily on the same Republican funding bill, and every single time it fails. We're talking about 11 failed attempts in 20 days. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, and that's exactly what's happening on Capitol Hill. The Republican bill would fund the government through November 21, just a 7-week extension. It's what they call a clean continuing resolution, meaning it just continues current funding levels without any policy changes. Sounds simple, right? Wrong, because Democrats are refusing to support it unless Republicans address a massive healthcare crisis that's about to hit millions of Americans. And here's where it gets even messier. The House of Representatives hasn't even been in session since September 19th. That's over a month without a single vote. Speaker Mike Johnson keeps extending their break, saying the House has done its job by passing the bill, and now it's the Senate's problem. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of federal employees are working without pay or have been furloughed. Military service members had their paychecks threatened until the Trump administration found a temporary workaround. And critical government services are grinding to a halt. So why won't Democrats just vote yes and end this? It all comes down to healthcare, specifically something called the Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. Let me explain what's at stake here. Back in 2021, during the COVID pandemic, Congress passed enhanced subsidies to help people afford health insurance through the ACA, also known as Obamacare. These subsidies significantly lowered monthly premiums for millions of Americans. We're talking about families saving hundreds of dollars per month on their health insurance. But here's the problem. Those enhanced subsidies are set to expire at the end of this year, December 31, 2025. If they expire, experts estimate that premiums could spike by an average of 75% for people buying insurance on the marketplace. For some families, that could mean an extra $400, $500, even $600 per month. According to the Congressional Budget Office, about 3.8 million people could lose their health insurance entirely because they simply won't be able to afford the higher premiums. That's almost 4 million Americans who could go uninsured starting January 1. Democrats are saying, look, we cannot in good conscience fund the government for 7 more weeks, knowing that millions of people are about to lose affordable health care. They want any funding bill to include an extension of these subsidies, at least through 2026. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has been crystal clear about this. He said that Democrats will not support a funding bill that ignores this health care cliff. They've proposed a compromise, pass a funding bill that includes the subsidy extension, and they'll vote yes immediately. Republicans, on the other hand, are calling this hostage-taking. They argue that the ACA subsidies are a separate policy issue that should be debated on its own merits, not tied to keeping the government open. They say Democrats are using the shutdown to extract concessions on a program that wasn't even part of the original funding debate. Senator Mitch McConnell said just yesterday that Democrats are playing politics with people's paychecks. He accused them of manufacturing a crisis to push through spending they couldn't pass through normal legislative channels. But here's the thing. Both sides are technically right, and both sides are also wrong. Democrats are correct that millions of people face a genuine healthcare crisis in just 10 weeks. But Republicans are also correct that holding up government funding over a policy dispute is exactly the kind of political brinkmanship that Americans are sick of. Now let's talk about who's actually suffering while Congress plays this game of chicken, because the impact is getting worse by the day. First, federal workers. There are about 850,000 federal employees who've been deemed essential and are still working, but they're not getting paid. That includes TSA agents, Border Patrol officers, air traffic controllers, and federal prison guards. These people are showing up to work every day, doing jobs that keep the country safe, and they have no idea when their next paycheck is coming. Another 350,000 federal workers have been furloughed entirely. They're sitting at home, not allowed to work, not getting paid, and watching their savings dwindle while politicians argue. Think about what that means for a family. Mortgage payments don't stop during a shutdown. Car payments don't pause. Grocery bills still come. Many federal workers live paycheck to paycheck, just like everyone else, and 3 weeks without income is devastating. We're already hearing stories of federal employees lining up at food banks, taking out high-interest loans, or putting expenses on credit cards they can't afford to pay off. Some are looking for temporary work, but who wants to hire someone who might have to quit without notice when the government reopens? Then there are the ripple effects on government services. National parks are understaffed or closed. The FDA has scaled back food safety inspections. The IRS isn't processing certain tax returns. Small businesses waiting for SBA loans are in limbo. Scientists at NIH and CDC have had research projects frozen. And here's something most people don't realize. When the government shuts down, it doesn't actually save money. In fact, it costs more. That's because when the government reopens, Congress always authorizes back pay for furloughed workers. So taxpayers end up paying for work that didn't get done. It's economically wasteful on top of being politically embarrassing. This brings us to the politics. And oh boy, are Republicans feeling the heat right now. The latest polling shows that 58% of Americans blame Republicans for the shutdown compared to 33% who blame Democrats. That's a massive gap, and it's growing wider with each failed vote. Why is the GOP taking such a beating in public opinion? Several reasons. First, Republicans control the presidency and had control of the legislative agenda heading into this crisis. President Trump has been relatively quiet on the shutdown, which makes it look like his party doesn't have a clear strategy or leadership. Second, the optics are terrible. Democrats have a simple, clear message. We want to fund the government and protect healthcare for millions of Americans. That's easy to understand and sounds reasonable to most voters. Republicans, meanwhile, are stuck trying to explain why a clean funding bill without healthcare provisions is the principled position. That's a much harder sell, especially when the human cost of the shutdown is mounting. Third, the House not being in session is killing them. Speaker Johnson's decision to keep the House on extended recess while the government is shut down looks absolutely terrible. It makes it seem like Republicans don't think this is urgent enough to even show up for work. Democrats have been hammering this point relentlessly. Where's the House? Why won't they come back to negotiate? Why are they on vacation while federal workers can't pay their bills? And it's working. Republican members of Congress are reportedly getting destroyed in their town halls and constituent meetings back home. Some have even started publicly breaking ranks, calling on leadership to come back to Washington and find a compromise. There's also a deeper problem for Republicans. This shutdown is happening less than a year before the 2026 midterm elections. History shows that the party responsible for a government shutdown usually pays a price at the ballot box. Republicans are worried this could cost them seats in competitive districts. Even some conservative commentators have started criticizing the GOP's handling of this crisis. They're saying that Republicans walked into a trap of their own making, bypassing a bill they knew Democrats wouldn't accept, then acting surprised when it failed. So what happens next? That's the billion-dollar question, and honestly, nobody in Washington seems to have a good answer. There are essentially three possible scenarios, and none of them look great right now. Scenario 1. Republicans cave and agree to include the ACA subsidy extension in the funding bill. This would end the shutdown quickly, but it would be a massive political defeat for the GOP. It would look like they shut down the government, put people through weeks of hardship, and ultimately gave Democrats exactly what they wanted. Conservative Republicans would revolt, and Speaker Johnson's leadership would be seriously weakened. Scenario 2. Democrats cave and vote for the clean funding bill without the healthcare provisions. This seems even less likely than Scenario 1. Democrats have been united on this issue in a way they rarely are. They know public opinion is on their side. It's hard to see what would make them back down now. Scenario 3. Some kind of compromise emerges. Maybe Republicans agree to a shorter-term extension of the subsidies, or Democrats accept a smaller enhancement than they originally wanted. This is probably the most realistic path forward, but it requires both sides to start negotiating in good faith, which hasn't happened yet. There's also a wild card possibility. President Trump could get directly involved and pressure Republicans to make a deal. He has enormous influence over the GOP, and if he decided this shutdown was hurting him politically, he could end it with a single statement. But so far, he's been surprisingly absent from these negotiations. Behind the scenes, there are apparently some informal talks happening between moderate senators from both parties. They're trying to find a compromise that both sides could live with. But these talks are fragile, and they haven't produced anything concrete yet. The clock is ticking in more ways than one. Every day the shutdown continues, the political damage to Republicans grows. But also, we're getting closer to the healthcare subsidy cliff that Democrats are so worried about. If we get to mid-November without a deal, the pressure on both sides is going to be enormous. So that's where we stand. A government shutdown entering its fourth week, 11 failed Senate votes, no end in sight, and millions of Americans caught in the crossfire. This is what dysfunction looks like. This is what happens when political parties care more about winning arguments than solving problems. And unfortunately, it's the federal workers, the families who need healthcare subsidies, and the American people who pay the price. The question now is whether anyone in Washington will show the leadership necessary to end this crisis. Because the longer it goes on, the more damage it does, not just to the people directly affected, but to public trust in government itself. What do you think? Should Republicans accept the healthcare provisions to end the shutdown? Or should Democrats vote for the clean funding bill and fight the healthcare battle separately? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep following this story closely, and I'll keep you updated as soon as anything changes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.